Vite supports importing several modules from the file system by using a special function, which we will review in this lesson. So first of all, let's clear main JavaScript file. Let's also go to index.html and remove img element with an ID of image. And now back to our main JavaScript file, and in here we're gonna write the following. Let's create constant with a name modules, and a special function which Vite provides us with is called Glob, which we will call on the meta object. And here we're going to specify paths to those modules that should be imported. And by the way, in here we can also use so-called Glob syntax, which is kind of like simplified version of regular expressions. So for example, I'll say that I wanna import all JavaScript files within a folder with a name 10, and I can do so by specifying asterisk instead of file name. And of course, to import these modules, first of all we have to create them in our project structure. So let's create folder with a name 10 within source folder, and in here let's create 3 modules. First one is a.js, and just to see that our modules will be imported, we're going to place here simple console log statement. And the same thing we're gonna do with the rest of modules. Second module will be b.js, which is also going to contain simple console log statement. And finally, third module will be called c.js. And in here let's see what we get into this module's constant by printing it in a console like this. And as we can see in the console, we get an object where every key of this object corresponds to a path to a particular module. And the value of each key is a special function which we can use to dynamically load particular module. And actually, before proceeding any further, let's take a look at the transform main.js file which browser has received. So once Vite has discovered that call to a Glob function, it has transformed this call into such form where we can see the usage of the method assign, which creates an object where every key of an object points to individual module we're trying to import, and as a value for every key. It has a function which contains instruction to dynamically import particular module. And now we can simply iterate over keys of this object. Let's do this by using values method on the object. And here we need to pass the object which values we have to iterate over. So we're using our modules constant, then let's call method for each to iterate over values of the modules object. And on every iteration we're gonna get a function which we can use to dynamically load particular module. And this function returns a promise, so we can chain then call, and when the promise will be resolved, once our module will be imported. As a parameter in here we're gonna get the result of execution of the imported module, and which is why in the console we have 3 different log statements. And each of these statements comes from modules imported dynamically. So on the initial page load, browser has instantly requested these 3 modules. As we can see, we have requests for every such module in the network tab, and therefore this console log statement was also run, which produced those log statements in a console. And now let's print out the value of the data variable, which we receive after promise gets resolved, after dynamic module import. So for now we're not going to see anything interesting within these objects, they're basically empty. But what we're actually supposed to get within these objects is the actual data which gets exported from the dynamically imported modules. And as of now, our dynamically imported modules do not export any data, which is why those objects are empty. So now let's go ahead and try to export something from module A. We're going to use default export and export number 2. From the next module b.js, we're going to export constant name with value John. And right now, within those objects, which we receive after promise gets resolved, first object is going to contain the key default, since we use default export within the first module, and it contains value which we export, that number 2. And the second object contains property name, because this is the constant name which we export from the second module, with the value John. But even though those imports of modules A, B, and C are considered to be dynamic, they are executed right away when we load the page. And now let's try to change our code in such a way that these modules will be loaded only after some event occurs. For example, on the document object, we can register a listener for a click event. And within this event handler, we can place all this code, which is going to dynamically import our modules. And now on the initial page load, we're not going to get any data within the console. As we can see, no logs are present here. But after I click on the document, in the network tab, we can see that 3 new calls are being made to fetch our modules A, B, and C. And of course, after execution these modules, we receive logs in a console, as well as the data that gets exported from those modules. And now a couple of words about the configurations, which we can pass when calling Glob method. So as a second parameter in here, it receives configuration object, and one configuration option is called eager. This option literally disables dynamic nature. And even though based on our current implementation, dynamic modules are supposed to be loaded only after clicking on the document, with this eager option set to true, our modules will be loaded instantly on the initial page load. Let's check it out. And right away on the initial page load, as we can see, our console contains 3 log statements, which is a hint that our dynamic modules were loaded and executed. And appropriate network requests to load dynamic modules we can see in the network tab. It's these 3 modules A, B, and C. But also let's see what is going to happen this time when I will click on the document. And in the console we're gonna get an error saying that module is not a function. And this is because we have used eager configuration option with value at true, and the returned modules object no longer contains functions that we can execute to load dynamic modules. And let's see what it contains instead by printing the value in the console. So as we can see in here, we got an object where every key is passed to a particular module, and instead of the value being a function which we can execute to load module dynamically, this time all modules were loaded immediately on the initial page load, and as values in this object, we have exported data from those modules. For example, first object contains key default, because first module uses default export, and the second module contains key name, because we export constant with this name from that module, and the value John. And as for the transformations which Vite has applied to the call to Glob function, we can see that it converted that call into such 3 import statements, where each import statement imports particular module, and the data which gets exported from every module is being saved as a value for keys of the resulting object that we store within modules constant. And of course, the same transformation which is being made on our JavaScript source file, we can see if we take a look at our plugin inspector in here. And this is how we can use special Vite function called Glob to import several modules at once. But this is definitely not all what Glob function can do, and in the next lesson, we're gonna review some additional details about this function.